Yeah. So basically, I think it's important to cover here. Like we've got this BC government's an election year, so there's been some massive changes in the housing market, and I think there's some of the biggest changes in the real estate market locally here in BC. So we'll kind of walk you through that these changes, and I think the big one first and foremost is basically the BC government removing zoning from municipalities, essentially, right? So any single family lot in BC with a population greater than 5,000 people can now have a minimum of 3 units on any single family lot that is greater than 3,000 square feet. And if you get up to 6 units on any single family lot that is near a transit station. So, or a transit stop, sorry. And so I think these changes are massive, right? I mean, typically you'd see, for example, here in the city of Vancouver, is this more restrictive zoning has kind of artificially throttled new housing supply and has created these barriers, right? Where we do have this gap of missing middle housing is what we call it, right? It's basically either you enter into a high rise condo, into a 2 bedroom, or you find the money somehow and you get into a single family detached house. We haven't had that mix of, duplexes, townhouses. So what we're calling this is obviously the multiplex zoning bill, which has now passed. Um, so I'm just going to walk you through this next slide. So some details on this basically is the municipalities, every municipality now in BC has until June 30th to update their zoning bylaws to comply with the legislation. So I've already chatted with a bunch of municipalities. They're actively updating their bylaws to basically accommodate this. So to give you a little bit more details on it, all single family zoning must now allow, in addition to up to 3 units, they have to allow a secondary suite or what we call as an ADU, or some people might call it like a coach house at the back of the home. So that's now by right. The cities can't block that. And so again, the BC government has essentially removed these zoning powers from all these municipal governments. And so, in addition to that, you're also getting a minimum height of 3 stories, and there's additional details for site coverage, parking requirements. So basically, what the BC government is doing is they're trying to. I'm just going to go back here, but to get through this multiplex zoning, is they're trying to keep the BC government, or they're trying to keep the municipal governments from finding ways to prevent this from happening, right? So one of the ways is, well, they said, well, okay, well, if we allow 3 or 4 units, but we throttle how high you can build, that would make really unfavorable product types, and so maybe it would prevent people from actually building this. And so what they're doing now is they're saying, okay, well, you got to do minimum 3 stories. We're going to remove parking requirements. So I've already chatted with several municipalities. So for example, like City of Burnaby, they'll probably be one of the most lenient. They're going to allow up to 1.5, most likely 1.5 FSR, floor space ratio. So if you think about this, like where I see this product fitting in the best is on these larger lots, right? So in the City of Burnaby, for example, it's not uncommon to have a 50-foot frontage or a 60-foot frontage lot. And so if you can put 4 units on that, you could potentially put on a 60-foot lot, you could put 4 units side by side, similar to like row housing, and you'd have like really nice layouts, really nice floor plans, and you'd get up to 1.5 FSR. So for example, on a 6,000 square foot lot, you'd be looking at 9,000 square feet of living space on what used to be a single family lot. So that's a dramatic change to your neighborhood. And I think this is going to happen across many of these municipalities. The one sort of asterisk that I'd throw in there is the city of Vancouver. So the city of Vancouver has what's called the Vancouver Charter, and that is actually supersedes the BC government's abilities to push through. And so what we saw back in September was we saw the city of Vancouver introduce their own multiplex rules, in which they allowed up to 1.0 FSR. So by limiting that FSR to 1 instead of 1.5, it doesn't necessarily incentivize a whole lot of multiplex. So I think that in the city of Vancouver, I could see a scenario where this doesn't shape up as everybody probably expects. If you think about the city of Vancouver as well, your standard lot in the city is 33 feet wide. It's 33 by 122 feet at the back. It's really hard to jam 3 or 4 units on a 33-foot wide lot. The floor plans are simply, they just, in many cases, they just don't work. They're too tight. So I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of adoption per se for multiplex in the city of Vancouver unless they change their bylaws. And because they just passed in September, I suspect they probably won't. So that's the pretty big changes on the multiplex side. In addition to that, they've also brought in what they're calling TOD areas, transit-oriented development areas. So the province has basically, again, stripped away the zoning from municipal governments, and they said, okay, well, if you've got land that is near a transit hub, particularly a SkyTrain station, we're going to mandate a particular height for these areas. And so for example, if you're within 200 meters of a SkyTrain station, it has to allow a minimum of 20-story height buildings. And so over the coming year, the province is going to designate 100 transit-oriented development sites, and SkyTrains will account for about 70 of those sites. So basically, if you're within up to 800 meters, you're going to get around 8-story buildings. And so again, whether you're an old wood frame condo building living in that neighborhood, or you got a bunch of single family houses, this is going to dramatically change neighborhoods. I think one of the ones that I think is most interesting is like around Point Grey area where they've got that transit station. You're taking single family houses and saying all of a sudden you can build 20-story towers in these neighborhoods. It's going to dramatically alter those neighborhoods over the coming decades. So just want to highlight here. So you can see this map below highlights all SkyTrain stations with yellow circles. So anything that you see with the yellow circle is basically these TOD areas that are basically already designated. And there's, you can click in further, but it basically shows you the radius. And so if you fall within that radius, you might be looking at a substantial land lift potentially in your neighborhood. The other thing I want to quickly touch on, which we just got a couple days ago, I'm sure there might be some questions on that, but BC government's also introduced a home flipping tax. So you can kind of see that the theme here is the BC government in an election year has brought in dramatic changes to the housing market. We're dealing with record unaffordability in this province. Removing zoning from municipalities is no small feat. Mandating high density high rises in many single family neighborhoods. Again, no easy feat. And then another controversial policy here is a home flipping tax. So effective January 1st, 2025, there will be a home flipping tax. So basically, if you buy and sell a home within a 2-year period, you're going to get charged 20% tax on your profits in the first year. And then after year 1, it becomes a sliding scale. We don't have all the details yet of that sliding scale because the policy, while it is expected to come into effect as of January 1st, 2025, there are still some details behind the scenes that are being worked out. So we'll wait and see how that all shapes up. But if you go through their latest budget announcement, it's a 200-page document. They do provide some details there. And so the tax is actually going to be retroactive. And so what this means is I think it actually will have some significant ramifications potentially for some people on this call. And so, for example, the way it reads today, and again, it's possible that they could certainly change this before it becomes official legislation. But the way that their outline reads today, it says, well, for example, if you bought, let's say, a pre-sale condo off a developer 3 years ago, and that development comes for completion in 2025, well, oftentimes you'll see, in the first year, right, easily 15% of the building will flip it, right? People say, you know what, my money's been tied up for 4.5 years. I want to exit. The market's up. I want my money. I don't want to move on to the next project. So if you bought a pre-sale 3 years ago, it completes in 2025, and then you go to sell it in that same calendar year in 2025, you're going to be subject to a 20% tax on any profits that are involved in that sale. And that's in addition to the capital gains tax that you're already charged, or active business income, depending on your history of flipping. So there are significant ramifications here, because, like I said, it is a retroactive tax. It's certainly not one that I'm excited about, but I think that these are the politics that are involved in setting housing policy. Um, the investor or the home flipper is the easy scapegoat when people are talking about affordability, and so the pre-sale implications are, I think, rather significant, because this is a BC government that is trying to incentivize new housing supply, right? We just talked about multiplex, we just talked about TOD areas, and so they're trying to incentivize new housing supply, but yet they're going to their investor base and saying, we're going to tax you. You put your money to work for the last 4 years, and if you want to exit on completion, we are going to take some of those profits from you. And so you can think about the ramifications of this when investors make up the bulk of pre-sale sales for developers, right? In order for a developer to put a shovel in the ground to build new housing, they typically have to sell 60 to 65% of the building via pre-sale in order to get construction financing. And so if you're relying on investors to fund those pre-sales, are you incentivizing the investors when you say, listen, we're going to tax you? We don't like what you're doing, which is making profits. We're going to tax them. So I actually think this could impact the pre-sale market to some extent, as this news sort of filters out. So I actually think it's going to be a net negative for new housing supply, which I think is already under pressure given where interest rates are at today, given the economic outlook that we're dealing with. Is I think that we're already seeing housing starts drop off rather significantly, and I think that there's potential here for even more issues down the road. So just to kind of highlight and round out my conversation here, as we talk about home flipping. So this is a chart that shows in Greater Vancouver and the Fraser Valley, so basically all of the Lower Mainland. We say, how much flipping activity is there in the Lower Mainland? And so what we can see here is that if we look at the number of homes that are bought and resold within a 24-month period, as of today, that number, we have 4% of the market. So 4% of transactions are homes that were bought and resold within a 2-year period. Now, we also have to ask ourselves, of that 4%, how many are happening because there's a divorce or a job relocation or a death? And all three of those types of people would be exempt under the home flipping tax. So in reality, the government is creating a tax here that maybe hits 2% of transactions a year. And so I really, in my genuine opinion and day-to-day workings on the market, I really don't see home flipping as the root cause of our issues. I think it's a very small fringe part of the market, and I don't think this change is going to have any material impact on creating additional affordability, but it is potentially going to impact the pre-sale market. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I think net as we get into the TOD areas as well, I would say, just to add to that, is what it's actually done. Well, I do think it's in general good policy that will stoke more supply over the next decade, making a lot more available land. Is that it's actually created quite a bit of uncertainty in the development world today, because it's really like, how do you value these sites? How do you value a land site today? We're so used to having land scarcity. You can think about a developer that went out there, acquired a site, and spent 2 years trying to, or in some cases longer, trying to rezone a parcel. And by finally getting a rezoning, you automatically boost the value of that land by taking it, from a single family product to a 10-story condo building. You improve the value of that land. But when you've suddenly rezoned swaths of the Lower Mainland and created all this additional supply of available development sites, it begs the question, well, what is the old site worth that you spent 2.5 years rezoning? And so I think it's created a lot of uncertainty in the market in the very near term. And so, like I said, I think that all in all, I think we're going to see a lot less new construction over the coming 12 to 24 months.